To be here with these illustrious friends, or soon-to-be friends, or maybe enemies, depending on our opinions on what we're going to be talking about today. Thanks to David, and the conversations around Bitcoin as an arts and culture hub. Now, obviously, we see an erasure of street art happening as development and gentrification and a lot of things in the world are moving and shaking. And then also, people aren't really including art in metaverses and virtual worlds or games nearly as much as they could. So, you know, there's a lot of different opportunities at stake with using blockchain and art and culture, and we are purveyors of that. We're at the forefront of a movement. And I'm very lucky and blessed to say that I've built one of the largest communities in the world for the space, and I've seen so many different really amazing innovations and uses for it to be more sustainable. But what's more sustainable than Bitcoin? So anyways, without further ado, I'd love for each of you to introduce yourselves, and then I'll just roll into it. It'll be a free-flowing conversation, nothing premeditated, and feel free to shoot anything back at me if you need or want to. Cool?
Sounds good.
All right, we can start with you, Matt, and work this way.
Matt Medved, whoa, no, that got a little louder there. Matt Medved, co-founder, CEO, editor-in-chief of Now Media. I've said it already, but you know us for NFT Now, the Gateway, our digital art fair, and our Web3 content tool suite, Sovereignty. Very excited for this conversation.
Hi, I'm Isabel, Foxen Duke, and I'm the host. Does it work?
A little bit closer.
A little closer. Oh, there we go. And I'm the host of the Bitcoin Rails podcast. We cover all kinds of new innovations and Bitcoin technical innovations in a post-ordinals universe. And yeah, my background's primarily in the Bitcoin native asset space, so excited to be here.
My name is Erik Jacobi. I'm the product director of RuneStacks, and I also have been somewhat involved with like putting up the Bitcoin Museum in Nashville.
Cool. Oh, check. Very cool. So it's going to sound interesting. So earlier today, I made an example of slapping a sticker on a Ferrari or etching your name into a tree as a comparison to ordinals and minting artwork on-chain to the Bitcoin ecosystem. How do you guys feel about the importance of having art and culture in the Bitcoin ecosystem, knowing that there's a lack of possibilities on flexibility with how you publish and how you receive and send the work?
Should I go?
No
Okay.
wrong questions or answers.
I think that, you know, first of all, I guess I might like push back a little bit on the question. I think that the tech around ordinals is actually still in development, and there's like lots of evolution that's possible in terms of how you can send, receive, create art. I think we're really just at the beginning of exploring what's possible on Bitcoin, and also there are many things that you can do with Bitcoin that you cannot do with Ethereum NFTs. Bitcoin NFTs, Bitcoin ordinals are like a particularly interesting space to play with generative art. The ways that you can play with generative art on Bitcoin are really distinctive and different from the ways that you can play with generative art, for instance, on Ethereum NFTs. Obviously, you know, there are some limitations by the fact that you are actually putting this art and creating this art all on chain. But obviously, most of us who are involved in this ecosystem certainly see that as a feature, not a bug. That is also what gives it its permanence and gives it its long-term value prop appeal. So yeah, like if you're gonna make really, really interesting, amazing art and put a ton of energy into it, or put art that's created by an incredibly, you know, high-value artist, you don't want it to be sitting on an AWS server. You don't even really want it to be sitting on IPFS. You want it to be sitting on Bitcoin. You want it to be sitting on a chain that you know is going to outlast all generations, you know, after you. So yeah, I think like we're really just at the beginning of exploring what art looks like on Bitcoin technically, and certainly the projects I'm most excited about are those that are using the guts of Bitcoin and using the UTXO model and the specific unique features of Bitcoin technically to make interesting art. So yeah, that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, I think you really nailed it there. when I think about like some of the pitfalls of the system that's used for like Ethereum NFTs and T, like there are a lot of really valuable, quite expensive NFTs where the file path like points back to like a Google Drive, you know what I mean? And like that's really dangerous, you know. A lot of that art may cease to exist in the future. You already have, for example, you know, a lot of like Xcopy's early work is lost forever because it was stored on servers that no longer exist. You know, I know that Art Gnome, Jason Bailey, has been a very vocal advocate of like preserving, you know, that, and that's something you don't need to worry about on Bitcoin, right? You know, I have a big collection. You know, I've collected on many chains. You know, collected a lot on Tezos, collected a lot on like, you know, new chains and stuff. I don't know how many of those are going to necessarily stand the test of time, but I know that Bitcoin will. Like Bitcoin at this point is inevitable in my eyes, and so you know it's one of those things too, where I actually also think that the kind of friction or the amount of energy or the cost of actually minting is also a bit of a filter. What you're not going to have happen on Bitcoin, I remember when OpenSea brought like Polygon into the ecosystem, and all of a sudden, like every day, my wallet was being flooded with like, you know, next to like Polygon NFTs like slop that like, you know, cost next to nothing to mint, and it was just a waste, and it was annoying. Like that's not going to happen on Bitcoin, right? Because you're gonna have, like you would run out of Bitcoin to do that. And so like there is, I think, some value in understanding that this could be a place for, like you said, very high end, very valuable artwork, and understanding that it has that permanence. You know, and it's like you said, it is an ecosystem that's still in development. So I have, you know, it's only, like a lot of people forget, you know, this really, Ordinals really came to be in like the top of 2023. So it's like, it's really only been like 2 years, which is nothing if you think about it. We've had Bitcoin for over a decade and we only just got the ETFs, you know? So like these things take time, but I think we've also seen an explosive amount of development and growth as well. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I think that like Bitcoin really does have an important role to play.
I would agree with both, and I would add that, yeah, only the tooling that's worth the effort will make it through to Bitcoin, and that's, again, the costliness that will make sure of that.
Yeah, no, I think the sustainability and longevity attached to it is, you know, if you are building on chain, you want to be building something with posterity and a future, right? So what better a place than Bitcoin? And I think the accessibility, you know, it does require more money. It does require more effort and energy. It does require you to do some R&D and research and learn, God forbid, about something new that's forever changing the way that we operate and do things. And I think, you know, as to the IPFS and the Amazon and Google Cloud type statements of storage, you know, it's really insane to think that we would put so much behind things that can disappear tomorrow. And we just saw that with TikTok's potential disappearance. And I tell people all the time, do not build castles on other people's sand. You think about how many phone numbers you have saved or how many phone numbers you have memorized. Probably only have your mom's number memorized or maybe significant other, but other than that, you know. So I think the permanence and immutability of Bitcoin provides some sense of safety, security, and peace of mind for what you're bonding it to, which should be as much as you care about on a digital side of things, from wills to birth certificates and more. Eventually, it might go that way. So that said, you know, how important do you feel it is to bring more curators, creators, and collectors into the ecosystem of Bitcoin? I think that's one of the biggest issues we see with all of these marketplaces, because a marketplace with nothing to market is just a very high overhead that can't sustain. So how are we with the importance, or what are new methods of bringing people into the ecosystem that are interested in creating, collecting, and curating?
Oof, yeah, obviously incredibly important. You said curators, collectors, and creators. That's, you know, the whole ecosystem right there. Yeah, I think that there's so much more we could be doing to work on that, especially in the area of fine art, which you mentioned. I would love to see more fine art development on Bitcoin. I mean, I think one of the sort of challenges in any ecosystem, but it's certainly Bitcoin is not immune, is there's sort of like a high focus on like speculative trading and PFPs, and sometimes that can sort of like dampen, I think, like the reputation of like what really is possible with this technology, because this technology, I think, is probably best used and best served for the fine art use case because of its permanence, because of its sort of anti-spam properties with Bitcoin fees. But yeah, like educating artists is a process, right? And to your point earlier, many NFT artists, you know, they don't necessarily know how Bitcoin works under the hood. You know what I mean? Like they don't even, you know, they might have never heard of a UTXO in their entire lives. And the question about whether or not they want to learn, you know, like that's like, you just got to even start there. Like before you even start pushing out the education about how the chain works and how the art works and how ordinals work, it's like, hey, let's, you know, help people understand the value prop of why you want to put your art on Bitcoin, get them excited about what that's going to do for them as an artist, and then maybe that will inspire them to learn kind of a little bit more of the guts of how the chain actually works, because working with ordinals is a somewhat technical process unless you're going to work obviously with a developer, right? Which I also highly recommend. Like I feel like that's like half my job is setting up artists and developers so that they can like collaborate and co-create. It's like if you're a band, you need like a singer and a guitarist. Like I feel like the best, coolest ordinals collections for the most part are like an artist and a dev, unless you happen to find the rare bird who can do both. So yeah, it's you know, an educational process, but I think, you know, over time, more and more artists are going to get the memo, just like any other technology, and I think that's inevitable.
I agree. I bought my first Bitcoin in 2013, and I still had to figure out what UTXOs were like for runes, you know, for the runes launch like last year. So like, you know, there's a lot under the hood that like even people who have been in the ecosystem for quite some time don't know. I always say like I did the crypto learning curve in 2013, back when there were far fewer guardrails. You know, not your keys, not your coins, like, you know, all that. That saved me from Mt. Gox. But like, you know, I still had to go through the NFT learning curve in 2021, and like the real Bitcoin knowledge I had to learn around runes. Like I hadn't done that, I hadn't done, you know, UTXOs. I hadn't ever like hosted a node. I hadn't like I really hadn't like messed around with the mempool. And so I had to really go through a whole new education. And if you think about it, that is incredibly daunting for somebody who is not crypto native. It was daunting enough for me, but you know, it's incredibly daunting for someone who's not crypto native. And Bitcoin is really unforgiving, right? Like, you know, I remember like making some mistakes with like, you know, the amount of like, you know, you know, how much I wanted to put behind it and like the mempool and such. And yeah, definitely made some costly errors in the runes rush. But you know, it was all very much a learning experience. But I was okay with that because I've also like I've built that kind of like tough skin of crypto. For a lot of people, that's just not going to work. You know what I mean? And so what I think the biggest barrier is to bringing new creators, collectors, curators, all of those is education. I think that's the biggest thing. I think like better, obviously, like it gets said all the time, but better UX, UI, like making this easier, making this more streamlined, making this a bit more like newbie normie friendly. And then the other thing too is that I think like you said, if artists come, then the others follow, right? Like I think artists are always like the prime drivers of attention and value. It's like if Xcopy dropped an ordinal tomorrow, it would be a huge deal, right? And there are a lot of legacy Ethereum collectors who might go venture over to Bitcoin who haven't already, because Xcopy would have brought them there. We saw this with like Ripcash when he did his drop. Ripcash, like, you know, had a very successful ordinals drop, very well respected artist. You know, a lot of collectors kind of like crossed the chasm. Same for like when Thank You X made the jump, when Vinny Hager made the jump, when like, you know, Postbook, et cetera. It's like, you know, as artists that people love and respect and follow and want to support make their way over there, you know, I think it encourages collectors to be like, okay, maybe this thing isn't so fringe. Maybe it's not just like a flash in the pan. You know, oh, this person believes in it enough to mint their work on there, then maybe I should be paying attention to it too. I think also like just having these like, you know, like this important voices and evangelists in the space. Like, again, like we would not, like Now Media, we would not have been early to ordinals if it weren't for Trevor Owens, right? Like he was the real active, he was the one who like got in my ear about it. And I listened to him and I'm glad I did. But it's like, who are those people for each of these ecosystems, right? Like, and who is that for like art on Bitcoin, et cetera? You know, I think that, and then when you think about collectors collectors is an issue that's facing the entire digital asset space, right? We don't have enough collectors on ETH right now. That's why the markets are challenging right now. And so Bitcoin is even more niche, but obviously there's also a lot of opportunity because Bitcoin, there's so many holders, the Bitcoin whales, a lot of this, there's so much liquidity and market cap, but the question is how much of that do people really want to spend on things? Because obviously a lot of people like to hodl their Bitcoin. But even if it's a small percentage, that's game changing in market dynamics for artists. So, I think it's a combination of factors, but I would say really focusing on making it easier to go and less friction to go from I'm interested in this to I'm on board, because it's an attention economy. There's a million things competing for attention all the time. And if things are hard and costly and a headache, people just don't have time for that, That's one of the reasons why we've seen, the Solana ecosystem in many ways supplant the ETH ecosystem this past cycle, especially for fungible tokens, meme coins, et cetera, because of just the lack of friction, the cheap fees, the easy onboarding. And so look, Bitcoin's never going to be Solana or one of these, nor should it be. There's a reason why it's Bitcoin. But the more we can kind of smooth it a bit, that on-ramp, and the more that we can get artists and culture drivers, the creators of culture, doing stuff on Bitcoin, the rest people will follow. And it starts to become a lot more normalized. I remember when people were talking about ordinals super skeptical, not that long ago, and now I feel like they've become more widely accepted, not just within the Bitcoin ecosystem where I know that they were very controversial for quite some time, but also I think just in general around it. A lot of people were like, what's this crackpot thing they're doing over on Bitcoin? And now it's okay, no, a lot of leading artists, really successful, interesting collections have launched there, and it's still early days. So to me, it's make it easier, and if the artists build it, people will come.
Yeah, no, it's definitely about, I don't want to say zero knowledge, because a lack of knowledge will also have you fall flat on your face too. But it's really a learning curve, and it's a expensive learning curve. And so you have to be committed to this, subculture of a niche area, and hope and trust the process and hodl forever and hope that it works out. But I think, you should never be afraid of the unknown, and that's where opportunities come from. And where there's opportunities, there will be opportunists in every industry, and we're seeing that where it's fast and cheap with Solana. When the cost of entry is high, so is the barrier with security, safety, and other things. And there's a reason that it's a little bit more complicated, and the prize should be that much more rewarding. And I think once there's more of a balance of the collector to creator side, and the curators that come in, if they're incentivized more, that will create some more of an ecosystem, flow of finance. And, when you think about, just in the past 4 years, I represented Keith Haring's estate for Sotheby's, and watching Christie's get in and understanding now that digital asset classification is changing. We're at the forefront of a movement, and as you said, it's still very, 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 premature to have these futuristic visions of what's to come, because a lot of it's never been done yet. And that's the beauty of it. Just by being in this room right now, or watching this feed, or listening to any of these podcasts or interviews or speakers, you're gaining knowledge and experience from people that have been in the trenches doing the work, taking the time to be committed and having conviction. So I'm excited about all of it, and I applaud people being a part of it and getting their hands dirty and rolling up their sleeves. Because without us, there's no them, right? So going into that, I mentioned Sotheby's and Christie's and these auction houses. I typically break down the Bitcoin white paper to people in order to shape a narrative from past to present to future of things. And I also give them Chris Dixon's is funneling into kind of a bottleneck of it's either this or that. Do you think we're getting more into a maximalist mindset again and kind of going backwards? Or do you think that artists are being more interested in exploring healthy alternatives after having bad things happen, hearing platforms getting hacked, seeing their money that they're invested in or their collections disappear? Do you feel like the narrative behind Satoshi Nakamoto and everything else is just a unspoken, standing on giants type motion to drive traffic?
I think ultimately it's going to boil down to like different chains are better for different use cases, right? And like what are you actually trying to create and what are you trying to do? I do think Bitcoin really outperforms on super high value art because of its longevity and also because of the fees, as you mentioned, right? Like this is something that requires proof of work. Like you can't just like spam create a collection and like dump it on people. It's like not financially viable to do that. So this is something where if you're going to create a collection, you're going to put up a lot of Bitcoin in advance. It's going to be something that matters to you. And I think that that lends itself to certain kinds of use cases, right? Like the properties that make Bitcoin Bitcoin are going to be the properties that make ordinals ordinals. That being said, there may still obviously be, you know, use case availability for chains like Solana, chains like Ethereum, any other, you know, chain in the universe where you can create NFTs. Each of those chains are going to have their own sort of like unique advantages. And I think that people will, you know, the market will decide ultimately, you know, like based on like how those, what the benefits are that those chains offer and what those technologies offer. But to me, it feels like, you know, the benefits of Bitcoin are like very, very clearly sort of on the like fine art side. Like I'm actually kind of like bearish on like cheap shit on Bitcoin. Like cheap collections on Bitcoin, they nosedive because like the fees just to trade them just so like make it such that like once things go below a certain floor price, like you're just screwed. Like there's just no point in even like trading them. So yeah, that's sort of kind of how I see it. I think, yeah, just free market sitch.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I also think it's like it's interesting, like especially this cycle, we've really seen like Bitcoin dominance like rise again, right? And I think it makes a lot of sense. You know, Bitcoin leads the pack, right? Like Bitcoin has always traditionally led the bull market, the Bitcoin halving cycle, all of that. And now what we've seen with like the institutional inflows on the ETFs, you know, the excitement around Bitcoin strategic reserve, whether that ends up being a digital asset reserve or is more tailored to Bitcoin. Obviously, it has Bitcoin front and center in the conversation, and you know, it's kind of like Bitcoin is like, you know, it's got this like future-proof kind of like element to it, where you know, like there's always going to be, you know, we've seen this with Ethereum and Solana. There's always going to be a faster new chain. There's always going to be a new proof of this, a proof of that. You know, some of these things are more legitimate than others. And I am a big believer that the future is multi-chain. There are chains that are just better for different things. There are chains that attract different cultures. You know, and that's a good thing. But like, if there's one thing I know is like, you know, at this stage, Bitcoin is inevitable. You know, like it's being adopted by the highest financial institutions in the world. It's being adopted by literally leading governments in the world. Like at this stage, like you'd be foolish to bet against Bitcoin. And so what's interesting then is like, all right, what is Bitcoin like best suited for on the arts and culture side? I think you highlighted really well on like, you know, higher end, you know, and we have plenty of other chains that are great for cheap, low cost things, right? You know, and there's different cultures. You know, like yesterday I was speaking at Ape Chain. You know, that's like a very like fun degen like NFT like. You know, like culture, demographic, and there's a reason why NFT launches have actually done really well on Ape Chain this cycle when like they haven't you know performed that well on other chains, and that's because like and a lot of them are very cheap. It's the same idea. It's like it's like the you know the ape mentality, right? And that's great. There's a chain for that. You know, what they're building with Abstract, great. You know, there's gonna be ones that are great for gaming, etc. But like, and then you know, Ethereum, you've got the provenance of like CryptoPunks and the earliest like art on there. I don't think that's going away. But I do think that like Bitcoin, you know, like I always say, like Bitcoin is the digital asset I have the most conviction in, like full stop, period. Like, and so I think artists who want their legacy to be a part of that, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think that as Bitcoin's dominance grows, if it continues to grow, and it looks like it's set up to, we're only going to see more and more interest from the community in being a part of that and tapping into that community and tapping into that network. And I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, I have to agree. We're in a multi-chain state, basically. We're trying to like open the doors and see how all the other chains gravitate to Bitcoin. I always, like, Bitcoin is forever. If there's a use case for your art that's not forever, then maybe go on another chain. But other than that, I really think that Bitcoin now with ordinals and runes has proven that We are out of a certain kind of testnet phase where we invite like NFTs and runes onto Bitcoin because it's proven now we can do it on chain, we can do it on Bitcoin. So if there's a costliness that you're ready to pay and you want your art on Bitcoin, there you go. Like, I think because you mentioned the maxi thing, I'm not too sure. Like, can you like ask again, because I don't know how that fits in there.
Yeah, so I mean, to some people, Bitcoin is too big to fail. The adoption is picking up rapidly, the scarcity is increasing, the supply is decreasing, the demand is there. It's becoming more common knowledge and talk about it. People are they're digging around. So I think for a while there was a very big separation and a lot of division with all of the chains. I think the future of things is interoperability and cross-chain, multi-chain, everything. But I feel like there was this cult type culture attached to it for a long time, and it sort of disappeared when there were options for more people to participate. And now I think that, you know, cultish type, die hard, never going back, never touching anything else again mentality is becoming more common sense. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think opposition breeds competition, which brings innovation, and that's what we have. We have everybody cloning and forking and trying to outdo one another, but you know, there's always going to be one winner. And right now, I think Bitcoin is one where it's the slow-moving giant that you listen when it talks. It doesn't speak much, but when it does, you hear it. You hear it when it goes down, you hear it when it goes up, and you hear it echo through your entire portfolio, right? So, yeah, that was where the maxi statement came from. But I think for the sake of permanence of like things that we want to be permanent in a world where it's so temporary, you know, I think about memberships. I think about, you know, marriages for people that have a lot of conviction and intent with long term. I think anything that we have from birth to death, you know, is perfect for something like this that doesn't have the bureaucracy and middleman and so on and so forth in between it. So I think for arts and culture, even with music, you know, a lot of people aren't really playing with music on chain because royalties and attribution hasn't really worked out in the past on multiple chains. But you can underpin things with Bitcoin as well, and it's just not really being explored because it's not being talked about. And because if nobody's talking about it, nobody's thinking about it. Out of sight is out of mind. And as Matt said, attention economy, like, you know, if you can't command it, it's not yours. So with that said, you know, we're in a digital age, we're in a digital renaissance using revolutionary technology. And I'd be curious, what do you feel about adoption of this in museums or in places where we are trying to preserve legacies of brands or people even, right? With AI and AGI and LLMs that are out there, we're creating new languages, and we're also messing with duplication of name, image, and likeness. Do you feel that for the art side of things, for authentication's sake, Bitcoin is potentially a better solution than anything that we have in the world?
That's a somewhat complicated question. I will attempt to answer it as somebody who is not super well versed in AI, but so it's interesting thinking about like, okay, so like what are the limitations of Bitcoin? One of the limitations is that Bitcoin does not have a native VM. And Bitcoin cannot read or understand things outside of its L1 blockchain. And so if that's something that you're wanting to do, it probably does make sense to use another chain like an EVM. I think there will be ways that AI will use Bitcoin, but it will be more like, you know, AI is operating keys, AI is being able to like effectively like control wallets. Bitcoin will never know about AI, but AI will know about Bitcoin, if that makes sense. And that's essentially how the layer 2 world works essentially as well. I think Bitcoin layer 2s are sort of, rapidly evolving in terms of like the trustlessness of bridges and how you kind of create these connections between Bitcoin and the outside world. But like fundamentally, like even with a really, really great bridge, Bitcoin will never understand anything outside of Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin doesn't have a sense of time outside of Bitcoin. So that is, I don't see that changing anytime soon. I don't see like the L1 having like VM, like computer like capabilities. And so, yeah, I think if that's something that you need or if that's something that you want, then using another chain makes sense. But I do think that the entire outside world will use Bitcoin. Bitcoin will not read the outside world.
Yeah, I think that's a good analysis there. What you said about like institutions and museums, I found really interesting because that's something that I'm very focused on in the digital art space. Across, just kind of across like chain agnostic. I think what we've started to see is like in the digital art space. Obviously digital art has existed for decades, but there's like this on-chain art movement that has come to the fore, is new and exciting and disruptive, and it's brought new collectors, new artists to the table. It has, brought digital art to the auction houses and now to institutions, with like, Rafik Anadol being like the first NFT based artwork to enter the permanent collection at the MoMA. We've seen the Pompidou acquiring CryptoPunks and other art pieces. LACMA has really been embracing digital art, on-chain art. And so to me, I think that like Bitcoin-based art has like a big role to play there, because if you think about like permanence and that like proof of provenance and this everything we've spoken to on like the why Bitcoin is well suited for high-end artwork. I think it's something we're going to see a lot more of in terms of like institutional embrace of Bitcoin-based artworks, and we've already seen. On a previous panel, we had a conversation around whether ordinals has had its Beeple moment yet, which I don't think it has. There hasn't been a cross-cutting cultural like moment like that that has brought this technology into the public discourse as like a household name, like Beeple did for NFTs and made the traditional art world take it seriously. But there have been some like nice steps forward, some like nice little that's where in terms of like Bitcoin shrooms auctions, the OMB auctions in Christie's, like ordinals are like starting to become a part of the conversation in the space, and so I think that's a good thing. It's going to take time; it always does. But I'm seeing a lot of. I always have to like pause and remind ourselves that ordinals are relatively new, right? Like this, it really kind of goes. Obviously, there's been on-chain culture with Bitcoin forever, well, not forever, but since the beginning. Rare Pepe's, Counterparty, all that. But like actually inscriptions on-chain of art. This is very, very new. And even the OG collections on ordinals are only a couple years old. And so these things take time. And the art world and the tradition, in museums, institutions, they operate on a little bit of a different time horizon, right? And so it's been amazing to see, some of the projects that have already gotten institutional, acceptance. But I think that we're going to start to see a lot more of that for the Bitcoin-based art community moving forward.
I'll just add to that also, ordinals has not yet seen a bull market.
Correct.
So something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I can totally agree with that. One interesting thing there, as I have been helping putting up the Bitcoin Museum in Nashville, there are a lot of questions about how to integrate the ordinals and digital art with physical art, and how to make it seem real, because that's a funny question. It's always like, my Bitcoin are everywhere. It's I unlock them with my key and stuff, but somehow as a human being, I still want something fungible, So it's really nice to see how for example, Bitcoin conference was building up the galleries at the conferences and integrating ordinals. I think Hong Kong was a great example because it was able to show it's bleeding out of the frame into the whole room. And yeah, I think digital art, NFTs have been there before ordinals, but ordinals, it seems like there's more of a seriousness behind it, and I think it's still related to the costliness of actually doing something on there.
Yeah, no, the pay to play, it's like you can't afford the expensive mistake. And I think that's where right now we're seeing that with Solana, with people just chasing every single thing, throwing darts and everything against the wall to hope something sticks, and lose 1,000 times and win one time 100,000x. And you got to be that one out of however many you got bots on top of it. So it's just your odds are probably worse than the lottery, honestly. But yeah, I think the underpinning of art is super important, and that's where I also really liked the royalty conversations that used to exist about it, because you know, I've purchased art and I've made art. I've done events at Deviant Art's headquarters, and I was explaining how, you know, you have the largest and oldest art database in the world. Why are you not operating with NFTs, and why are you not exploring the preservation of this historic stuff, right? And I think the fear of the unknown and the lack of technology, the lack of knowledge towards the tech just made it a very scary thing, and it would be an even worse PR or pub moment if it failed, which most of these platforms end up doing because they don't want to spend the time to figure it out, which is a disservice to all of us, because then we can't go further down the line. And as a Bitcoin museum, you're kind of showcasing the journey, right, the roadmap. And so I really try to wrap my mind around how to introduce ordinals in a way that's digestible, because I'm constantly on stages and doing interviews, breaking things down and making them so an 8-year-old can get it, right? So what would you say is the easiest way to describe what ordinals are in your to your 8-year-old self?
I would love to take this. Okay. So this is like my number one job, is explaining this. So basically, what Casey Rodomore did, like the real fundamental like innovation of ordinals, was that Casey numbered every single Satoshi in the blockchain, in the Bitcoin blockchain. It's like trillion, bajillion, a million. I don't even know this number. Somebody does, but I don't know it. When you put numbers, ordinal numbers is how he describes it, onto every Satoshi in the blockchain, Satoshis individually numbered become non-fungible tokens, essentially. They become non-fungible assets. Satoshi number 1 is fundamentally distinct from Satoshi number 2 and 3 and 4 forever and ever and ever. And perhaps some of these special Satoshis have special value, right? So I won't say my birthday, I won't dox myself, but let's just say for the sake of argument that, you know, I wanted to get the Satoshi that represented my special birthday. I could get that and potentially pay a premium for it. So that was the sort of initial, like, sort of mind-boggling innovation of ordinals, was taking a very, very deeply fungible asset, an asset that everyone in the world assumed could never be anything other than fungible, and gave it non-fungible possibility, non-fungible potential. Once you have these non-fungible tokens, essentially in the form of numbered Satoshis, you can make transactions, just regular old Bitcoin transactions with these Satoshis, and you can make little notes in the transaction. You can write whatever you want. You can write your name. You can write a JSON file. You can add image data. You can add video data. You can do music. You can literally add any kind of arbitrary data that you want into effectively the memo field of this Bitcoin transaction of these numbered Satoshis. And forever and ever, for the rest of time, as long as Bitcoin exists, after that transaction is executed, that Satoshi will always reference in this Bitcoin immutable ledger that piece of data, whatever that piece of data was. Effectively giving this numbered Satoshi wild protocol the potential of NFTs, of how we experience NFTs on other chains. And that is, in a nutshell, what ordinals and inscriptions are.
That was excellent. I love that. I love that. Thank you for that. I think that's a great way for somebody who like understands like NFTs or crypto like generally, but like doesn't understand why ordinals are distinct and how Bitcoin works, and I think that's perfect. I'm going to take a different direction on the question, because sometimes like one of the things I often like say when I'm trying to explain like NFTs or any of these things is I try and get away, like for somebody who just doesn't understand like what is this at all, I'm just like, it's not about NFT, it's not about the word ordinal, this is about digital ownership, right? And it's about digital ownership in a way that just was not possible before. You know, like there was just no way to prove digital ownership around this thing until we had this technology. And you did an amazing job of explaining like how that works with ordinals and Bitcoin. You know, and I think that, but I think like that it's the power of digital ownership that I think is like the magic of it. You know, and the opportunities that that affords. You know, now digital artists being able to create collector bases, being able to sell at auction houses, being able to, you know, being able to like build these communities with aligned incentives around art, culture, and like these community projects. And so, you know, to me, it kind of boils back down to always this like idea of digital ownership. So that's kind of like where I would start. Yeah, and then I would refer them to you.
I agree with both of you. Smart 8-year-olds. But I think to take it a little back, because I think tooling enables education and education enables experience. So you said we're still in development. I think so too. Ordinals has just been integrated, or just integrated a SATS chip. I don't know if you've seen it. And that's a really, really cool tool to basically put like your art, whatever, on the SATS chip and have it on this little credit card-like thing and give it to an 8-year-old and say, here, this is your Ninja Turtle. And this is a tool that enables them to educate themselves and build experience, finding out what this actually is, without much understanding of UTXO management, how Bitcoin appreciates, or whatever it is. It is your Ninja Turtle, it's on this little card, and here you go. I think that's a great way to involve anyone in ordinals and NFTs.
I'll add one other note, just following up on what you said. Another, like, I think that was like a really excellent point about sort of the movement of ownership. Another way to think about ordinals would be the ability to move data or information on the Bitcoin blockchain instead of monetary value.
Yeah, no,
Amen.
I think the way that you described it reminds me of when I used to buy and sell domains. It's really like the early domains, early bird to it. You get the one of your liking and maybe 3 letters or 4 letters. Same with new social platforms, except for this time it doesn't have the history, this time it does have the history that you can backtrack and look into, which I think is really interesting to look into when you think about like real estate on chain or luxury vehicles and things of that nature, where it's like, this is an asset class that I feel needs to be protected and safe and secure. And, you know, it's a slow moving machine and you can trace everything. And I feel much more confident having my things in this storage unit than that storage unit, or all of those storage units, right? So there is kind of a beauty in the peace that comes with the way that the infrastructure is with Bitcoin. And I think you all kind of broke it down very well for people to understand. I think if I did not know anything, I would now be interested in exploring. And we're looking at companies like MetaMask dropping physical cards right now. We're seeing the innovation before our eyes and application and use cases. We're seeing Coinbase try to take over XYZ ABC city and offer tokens and tokenomics to, you know, these countries and cities, right? And for me, like, one of my entry points to all of this was self-sovereignty and ownership. That's what we taught every day to thousands, tens of thousands of people on Clubhouse, and then brought them over to Twitter Spaces and did the same thing. And, you know, that narrative has never shifted. And I think it's extremely important to maintain destigmatizing through tangible use cases that we can prove, and we're doing it every day. So all that said, you know, if you had like maybe one piece of advice that you would give to somebody that could help them navigate more effectively or feel more confident in exploring all things Bitcoin, what would it be? Whether that's a platform, product, service, a group, a community.
That's a really good question. And definitely sort of like the first thing that comes to my mind is like, oh my gosh, we need more like good information and like centralized information, for lack of a better word, like information that's like clear and accessible and easy to get to, and you don't need to like fish around for days to like find an answer to your question. But yeah, I mean, I would say Bitcoin Magazine, like shout out to Bitcoin Magazine, has actually done like a really, really good job with ordinals in particular, especially given the fact that they are like highly incentivized to like mostly cover finance and mostly cover the markets. They took a stand to cover ordinals really deeply, despite like a lot of blowback in the early days when like a lot of Bitcoin maximalists were like giving them shit for it. And so they have put out a lot of really interesting content around ordinals and sort of like how to get started there. And it's just such a big, media organization. So lots of wealth of knowledge there. Again, I think there could be a lot more. And yeah, I will say, creators are really the ones who pushed ordinals forward. Like I think about like how ordinals got to where it is now, and I think of people like ZK Shark, and I think of people like Raktoshi, and I think about the people who actually like launched these early collections and created communities around them. Like they were the folks who were doing most of the education early on, is the reality. And so, ultimately, I think most people who have a solid understanding of ordinals are people who join specific creator communities. And so, yeah, like I won't like shill any particular one of them for obvious reasons, but I do think that's sort of like a reality of the situation, and I'm grateful to creators for doing that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And jumping off of it, like you said, I think that Bitcoin Magazine has done a great job. We in the panel just before this, we announced, or we kind of that we're going to be launching BTC Now, which is going to be our dedicated content vertical for culture on Bitcoin, specifically focusing on spotlighting creators, uplifting projects and builders, and spotlighting builders on the chain. And I think that's very much in keeping with our ethos of like empowering creators and really supporting those who are trying to bring this to the next level. So I think that I hope that we build what can be like a really good resource there. I know that in the early days we did a lot of coverage, obviously, as I mentioned, with the Twitter space, and a lot of editorial around like what are ordinals, how do inscriptions work, how can you inscribe stuff like that. So take that to the next level. I also want to give a shout out. I know I shouted him out before, but Trevor Owens has been like personally like my Sherpa into ordinals, and also for NFT Now, he was the one who really like helped guide our coverage into it. I also want to shout out his community, the Pizza Ninjas. I think that like it's a very tight-knit community that is really focused on education and like empowering each other's. I know like during the Runes launch, like that was the place to get the right intel on Runes and how to get set up for it. And like that was and you saw their floor price rise as a result of that. That wasn't over like some speculation over an airdrop. It wasn't over like some BS farming incentive or whatever. Like they literally, their floor price rose because they were doing the best job of super serving their community around a very like high profile launch. Excuse me. And I was actually really inspired to see just how like Trevor like rallied the community around that. And whatever you think of Runes or whatever you think of like the outcome of it, the way that he super served his community to help educate and empower people to like learn about and participate in this new thing, I thought was just remarkable, and one of the best like examples of like community utility that I've seen across any chain. And so I think like I would encourage people, obviously, you learn by doing in this space, right? You can read all the Bitcoin Magazine articles, you can read all the NFT Now, BTC Now articles about ordinals and runes, but that if you don't have skin in the game, if you haven't like gone and if you haven't jumped in the mempool, you don't really have the same sense of it. And so I would encourage people to dip their toes in the water, and I would encourage them to join communities of like-minded people who are curious and have their hearts in the right place and are looking to like empower and educate others.
Yes, and what I want to add is like other than finding websites and communities as sources for information, AI is changing how we are interacting with the internet in general. It's not anymore where is the information. It's just like what's your interface and what do you want to ask it. And if the AI obviously is like right now it's not that smart, but specialized or what data it has been fed. The team of Finding Satoshi actually put up Chat BTC. So you're able to find that and just go on there and you can ask any question that's Bitcoin related, UTXO related, ordinal related. And I think that going forward, companies like Bitcoin Magazine will have something like an AI and an interface for people to just ask questions into. So it's more like we're not searching the information anymore, the information will find us. And I think it's a crazy time right now we're living in and through, but I think that's ultimately going to accelerate the Bitcoin adoption.
Yeah, no, I mean, what I'm hearing is basically the new C-suite. It's like connection creates community, community creates culture, and culture cultivates communities all over the world. Did I summarize that well? I think that's a lot of C's. But yeah, and stay curious, right? At the end of the day, I've been a huge community builder in the space from, people that were into metaverses. I brought them from Spatial to Decentraland to CryptoVoxels to Somnium to OnCyber to all across the board. And then people that wanted to learn about wallets, we went MetaMask, Rainbow, Trust, Phantom, you name it. Like, that in the marketplaces, OpenSea, Rarible, Super Rare, Maker's Place, no, it's just endless, right? And as they come and as they go, you start to see the relevance or irrelevance of whatever their service offerings are, or the sustainable models that they do or don't have. And I think that's kind of the beauty with on the Bitcoin side, things are moving a little bit differently because of that conviction and consistency and interest in the quality of what you're doing. There's more intentionality with it, and I think it shows. So all that said, I appreciate all of your time up here. Thanks, Mike, Isabel, and Erik. Is that right? Yeah, I'm right. I think that is our time here. So if you can, give a round of applause, unless you had something more.
I was just going to thank you. Yeah,
Oh.
thanks for having us. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah,
you,
absolutely.
Erik.
Pleasure's all ours. Thank you, guys.